Well, welcome to today's Urban Nonpoint Source and Stormwater Planning Grant Program webinar. I will refer to this as the Urban Planning Grant for the rest of the presentation. We are covering the application cycle for calendar year 2022 grant awards. So I'm Joanna Griffin and the Runoff Management Grants Program Coordinator at Wisconsin DNR. The agenda for today's webinar includes an overview of the Urban Planning Grant Program and some things to keep in mind as you fill out an application and complete the application process. First, I'll give you an overview of the Urban Planning Grant Program. Our Urban Grant website can be found by going to the main DNR website and typing UNPS in the search bar. Here you'll find tabs with information, applications, and important forms, and links to relevant laws. The Urban Nonpoint Source Planning Grant Program exists under the authority established in Statute 281.66 and Chapter NR 155. NR 154 identifies best management practices, technical standards, and cost share conditions that apply to the department, state agencies, governmental units, the Board of Regents, and cost share recipients when serving to provide or received cost share funds under NR 153 or 155. NR 151 establishes runoff pollution performance standards for non-agricultural facilities and transportation facilities, and performance standards and prohibitions for agricultural facilities and practices designed to achieve water quality standards. In summary, urban planning grants reimburse up to 50% of eligible expenses, up to a maximum award of $85,000 for the completion of eligible urban runoff control planning activities. The grant period is 2 years. Most grants awards are given on January 1st of the calendar year following the application. So if you submit an application this April and are awarded a grant, your grant award period would be January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2024. A 1-year extension may be requested. So next I'll provide some general information about the planning grants and go into more detail about the terms in the summary. So I'm going to go over the following: eligible applicants, what our definition of an urban area is, what are eligible activities and deliverables, and then the maximum reward and reimbursement. So who is eligible to apply for an urban planning grant? As I mentioned earlier, 281.66 is the statute governing the Urban Planning Grant Program. It says the DNR can provide financial assistance to a governmental unit. DNR may also distribute a grant to the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin system if the campus meets certain conditions. So the department may distribute a grant to the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin system for practices, techniques, or measures to control stormwater discharges on a University of Wisconsin system campus that's located in a municipality that's required to obtain a stormwater discharge and that's located in a priority watershed, a priority lake area, or an area that's identified as an area of concern by the International Joint Commission under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Governmental units eligible to apply for an urban planning grant listed here on the slide can apply for a project located in their governmental unit. If the jurisdiction of governmental units submitting the application does not correlate with the project planning area, the other governmental unit that's applying must be required to control stormwater discharges. So now I'll talk about the definition of an urban area. Per Wisconsin Statute 281.66, the department may award a local assistance grant for stormwater management for urban areas and for areas that are expected to become urban within 20 years. 281.66 and NR 155 define an urban area as an area with a population density of 1,000 or more persons per square mile, or an area of industrial or commercial land uses, or an area that is surrounded by this area, described in this definition. So we'll go into a bit more detail. An area with a population density of 1,000 or more persons per square mile applies to residential areas. The population density must correlate to the project area. So if the project area covers only part of the governmental unit, then the density calculation should be based on the population and area within the project area boundary. Here are a few commonly asked questions and answers. So what is acceptable evidence that an area will become urban within the next 20 years? So acceptable evidence is a locally approved land use plan. What if only part of the municipality is an eligible urban project area? So there are two options. You could eliminate the non-urban area from the project area, or you could prorate eligible costs based on the amount of urban versus non-urban in the project area. What if the plan evaluates BMPs or potential BMPs located in an urban area, but with a substantial non-urban upstream drainage area? So if the BMP's drainage area is greater than 50% urban, or will be at least 50% urban within the next 20 years, or if the volume of runoff treated is greater than 50%, then we need to prorate costs based on the amount of urban, or will be at least 50% urban, or the volume is greater than 50% urban, then all costs are eligible. But if they're less than 50%, then we need to prorate the costs on the amount of urban versus non-urban drainage area or the volume of runoff treated. So greater than 50% costs are eligible, less than 50%, they need to be prorated. So here's an example. In this slide, let's say the black boundary shows the limits of a municipality, and the blue line is a river running through it. This red line delineates the area of draining to the segment of the river within the municipal limits. This hatched area within the municipality is mapped as urban by federal census and covered by a WPDES permit. The other areas have been annexed, but are still agricultural land use. And the community is developing a stormwater quality management plan to meet developed urban area standards in an urbanized area. So let's say as part of the plan, the community is evaluating a best management practice in location 1 with the drainage area here outlined in purple. Will the grant fully reimburse evaluation of this BMP as part of the plan? The answer is yes, because more than 50% of the drainage area is urban. So next, let's say here's location 2 with the drainage area outlined in purple. Will the grant fully reimburse the evaluation of this BMP? The answer is it depends. First, does the community have evidence that the upstream drainage area within municipal limits will be urban within the next 20 years? If yes, then it's greater than 50% and fully reimbursable. Let's say no. Then what percent of the runoff treated by the BMP is urban? Is the proposed BMP being sized or designed to route some or all of the upstream area around the BMP, so the majority of runoff treated is urban? If yes, then it's fully eligible. If no to all of these, then the BMP can still be evaluated, but it must be prorated for the urban versus non-urban. So why this limitation? State statute limits DNR to only reimbursing urban area planning under this grant. There's been some confusion about what constitute eligible urban planning areas, which has caused problems with reimbursements in the past. For example, there have been instances where a community identifies areas within their boundaries that meet the definition of urban and apply for a grant to address those areas, but they end up with a plan covering their entire municipality plus large upstream agricultural areas. And then we are not able to fully reimburse 50% of the planning. We've also seen cases where a community that meets the definition of urban in its entirety develops a plan covering not only their community, but the entire HUC 12 they're located in, plus multiple upstream HUC 12s that are predominantly agriculture. This scenario also does not meet the requirement for eligible planning grant areas, unless a grantee has evidence that they'll be urban within the next 20 years. So I'm going to take a break now for any questions on these terms.
Thanks, Joanna. And just as a reminder, if you have questions, please use the chat box to direct them to Q&A, Karine. Karine, not seeing that we have any questions coming in right now. Give it another couple of seconds here, see if anyone's typing in. All right. Well, we could always circle back to this section if people think of questions as we move on, but for now, we'll just continue on, Joanna.
All right. So now I'm going to talk about eligible activities. So here's a list of the eligible planning activities and deliverables associated with, and we'll go over them in detail with the deliverables associated with them. So the first category includes the ordinances that are required for compliance with MS4 WPDS permits. So this is post-construction stormwater management, illicit discharge detection and elimination, and construction site erosion control. The next category is other ordinances affecting the quality of urban runoff. For example, pet waste ordinance. Another type of ordinance that falls in this category is low impact development ordinance, or LID. And that's an approach to land development that manages stormwater as close to its source as possible in order to mimic natural processes that result in the infiltration, evapotranspiration, or use of stormwater in order to protect water quality. Stormwater quality management plan is usually the big ticket item in most planning grants, as it requires land use inventory and modeling of no controls pollutant load, inventory of existing BMPs, and modeling of existing conditions, pollutant load. And finally, it requires inventory and evaluation of opportunities, including building models that evaluate hypothetical alternatives for reducing pollution load, and then using this information to develop a plan to reduce pollutant load. The next category of eligible activity is developing a storm sewer system map. And in this context of this grant program, it means a map that meets all of the requirements of the grantee's WPDES permit requirements. Another eligible activity is developing a municipal pollution prevention plan, which may include some or all of the elements listed. For example, leaf and yard management procedures or street sweeping procedures. The next category is planning and development of local programs for urban runoff control. Some examples of such programs would be post-construction site stormwater management, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site erosion control, or education and outreach. So notice that several of these items are also listed as types of ordinances. And this is because program developing is different than ordinances developed. The ordinance establishes the legal authority, and the plan is the details of how that authority will be implemented. For example, program plan would include specific details such as outfall inspection schedules and testing methods, and spill response procedures, etc. The program plan complements the ordinance but is not the same. The next category is evaluation of alternatives for local financing of urban runoff control program. Note this is not the same thing as including BMP cost estimates in a stormwater plan with the recommendation to apply for DNR grants. Rather, this is evaluating alternatives for development of a dedicated revenue source for the water quality management program. It includes the cost of overall water quality program, including administration and maintenance, not just capital projects. And it must include a financial evaluation of these alternatives, as opposed to a recommendation to apply for DNR grants or a statement that options were discussed. All of these preceding eligible activities were to develop planning deliverables. This last category is different in that it reimburses costs associated with the implementation of an urban runoff control program, specifically public I&E program implementation and administrative costs associated with establishment and implementation of dedicated revenue source. You may remember there were some activities similar to both of these in previous categories, so we'll go over how these are different. The previous information and education category was to develop an information and education plan, whereas this category is to develop and implement an information and education program. So this category includes doing actual outreach. The second eligible activity in this category is related to the previous one of evaluating the feasibility of implementing a stormwater utility or other dedicated revenue source. Whereas this category would reimburse for costs associated with the initial establishment of implementing a utility or another dedicated revenue source. So here's an example. Under an urban planning grant, DNR can fund the development of a stormwater quality management plan for meeting the developed urban area performance standards, but it won't fund implementation of specific BMPs recommended by the plan, although the urban construction grants could help pay for some of that. For these two activities, the DNR can fund the implementation, not just the plan. So now I'm going to pause for any questions related to eligible activities and deliverables.
Still no questions in the chat room.
Yep, still not having any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll continue on.
So next I'm going to discuss the maximum award and the reimbursement process. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Urban Planning Grant is a reimbursement grant program. The DNR does not pay the money up front, but rather reimburses up to 50% of the money spent. And the maximum grant award is $85,000. So reimbursement means that no money is reimbursed until the grantee has incurred expenses and made progress towards the development of planning deliverables. So let's walk through the steps. So first, DNR issues a grant award. Then the grantee submits a professional service agreement, or PSA, to DNR for approval. Then DNR issues the PSA approval. And this is an opportunity for DNR to help the grantee evaluate whether the consultant proposed scope meets the requirements. This happens before agreements are executed, and the grantee begins incurring costs under those agreements. Next, the grantee completes a draft of the planning deliverables and then submits the draft planning deliverables to DNR for review and approval. After DNR reviews and comments on the draft deliverables, the grantee develops final deliverables that meet the DNR requirements. The grantee pays a contractor and then requests reimbursement from the DNR. The DNR reimburses the grantee the state share amount up to 50%. Then finally, the grantee receives reimbursement. One thing that's unique to planning grants is you can request a partial reimbursement for deliverables in progress. This is not the case with our urban construction grants. Construction project grantees may only request reimbursement of fully installed BMPs. So under the planning grant program, we still have some requirements for partial reimbursement requests. So first, a progress report documenting progress for which the reimbursement is requested is required with the RFR. The progress report must explain what work has been done on what deliverables. Second, only 50% of the amount eligible for reimbursement can be reimbursed for partial reimbursement. So if the cost share rate is 50%, then only 25% of the amount spent is what can be reimbursed partially. And third, grantees are required to pay back any partial reimbursements if they don't complete final approved deliverables within the grant period. So this means that we can't keep partial reimbursements for deliverables that aren't complete, and you can't keep partial reimbursements and deliverables that aren't approved. And as a side note, when grantees hire a consultant to develop deliverables, and those deliverables are submitted to the DNR, typically the DNR reviewer requires some changes to the deliverables before approving them. And in some cases, when the grantee has made a final payment to the consultant and closed the contract, the grantee has difficulty addressing the comments with internal staff. So as you're developing your scope of work and your project budget, it's a good idea to anticipate what the consultant will need to develop for both the draft and final version of the deliverables for DNR, and work this into your project schedule and budget. So we're going to go over a couple questions related to reimbursement. So what is the difference between eligible planning activities and expenses eligible for cost sharing? So this slide shows an example of a project budget, which includes eligible planning activities, such as map and inventory and existing conditions modeling. But the total cost listed at the bottom here of these activities, the $94,650, does not equal the amount eligible for cost sharing, which is the $63,100. So why would this be the case? One possibility is that the portion of the planning area does not meet the definition of urban development. And then only the urban areas of the BMP watershed is eligible for cost sharing. Another possibility is that it's evaluating both water quality and flood control. And only the water quality portion of the plan is eligible for cost sharing. And again, total cost should be prorated accordingly to determine the eligible project costs. So in this example, 2/3 of the planning area meets the urban area definition and 1/3 doesn't. So 2/3 of the project cost is eligible for reimbursement. And you can see the difference between column B, which estimated total cost, and C, which is the amount eligible for cost sharing. So next, what's the difference between the amount of eligible expenses and the amount of reimbursement? The maximum grant amount is 50% of the amount eligible for cost sharing, up to a maximum award of $85,000. So in this case, the maximum award amount is 50% of the $63,100 eligible for cost sharing, which happens to then be $3,550. So you can see from the slide that the application automatically calculates the maximum award amount based on the amount eligible for cost sharing. So the take-home message here is that the amount eligible for cost sharing is not the same as the grant amount or the amount of reimbursement. So to review, the total project cost is $94,650. The amount eligible for cost sharing is $63,100, and the grant award is 50% of that amount, which is then $31,500. In this example, based on total cost, the requested state share amount is the maximum state share amount, and the local share is the difference between the total project costs and the grant award. So the difference between $94,650 and $31,550, which then equals $63,100. So the amount eligible for cost sharing is not the grant amount. So I'm going to pause in case there are any questions about this section.
All right, we do have a few questions that have come in. First up is, would it pay for the conversion of a paper storm sewer system map to a GIS storm sewer system map? So is that converting from a paper to a GIS map? Does that pay?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, this is Corrine.
Corrine?
And I'm gonna look to Susie or Amy on this too. I mean, generally, the planning grants are used to create the storm sewer system map and or update it. So depending on the circumstances with your municipality, as an example, if you have come under TMDL requirements, we're seeing updates to programs, stormwater programs, and including mapping. So I think it's possible, but I'd have to check and see for some of our mapping projects if it was an existing map that was converted to GIS and that was funded just solely for that purpose.
This is Susie, and I would echo what Corrine has said to double check that. Again, I would think so, that it could be funded as well, but we should definitely double check the code.
Yeah, and we can get back to you on that. We're keeping track of who's asking what questions, so that's okay. And I'll jump right in here. We've got two questions that they're somewhat similar. One of them is, a planning project eligible for grant funds if work is already in progress, or are projects only eligible if work will not begin until the grant funds are approved? And then the other question is, can grant application costs be covered by the grant if awarded? And essentially the answer to all of those questions is, we can only cover costs for work that happens during the grant period. So we're not going to be able to cover the application cost if a consultant is preparing the application on behalf of a municipality. And we cannot cover planning costs that were done prior to the grant period.
All right, we do have another question in here. How do you quantify the quality treatment versus quantity treatment for eligible costs? My question again is, how do you quantify the quality treatment versus quantity treatment for eligible costs?
I think we'll look to Amy and Susie on that one. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be based on SLAM modeling.
That's what I was thinking, or I was wondering if that could be clarified a little bit more to make sure we're not getting confused between the grant years that go every other year. So a construction grant of putting in a BMP versus this planning grant. 'Cause the planning does have a lot of what we would consider quality pieces of the MS4 program, getting procedures updated, getting maps updated. So it's definitely not all quantity based.
Yeah, what I would say is that there's some work that's going to be pretty obvious. So if you're doing hydrologic modeling, that's probably focused on quantity. But if you're defining the drainage areas for the purpose of modeling the pollutant discharge for no controls or with controls, that would be a water quality piece. So some of it's just a question of kind of what's the purpose of the activity from the planning grant. For the construction grant, I think that there's some other prorating methods, but for planning, it's really a question of what are you trying to accomplish with that particular piece of the project.
And on a different note, but related to the project budget, just worth noting that you can ask for less than the maximum state share. You can request a state share that's less than the maximum grant amount. So depending on what your project budget is and other flavors of money you may be bringing to the table, you certainly are not required to request the maximum allowable grant amount.
Right, and as you see on the screen here, the form calculates your maximum grant amount, but then this yellow box is where you put in what you actually want. So you could put up to the 31,000, but you could put less.
All right, well, thank you, ladies. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time. But if we do have any questions come in, we can always circle back. So we can continue on, Joanna.
All right. So now I'm going to go over a few things related to the application and instructions and requirements. So each page of the instructions has a header that indicates the part and question of the application covered on that page. Additionally, they're divided into columns. So the left side of the page is directions and the right side is an explanation. We've also removed the requirements to send in hard copies of the application. So we officially accept and prefer electronic submissions. As part of the grant process, it's required that the grantee identify and establish an authorized responsible government official, or ARGO. The ARGO is the only person that'll be able to sign grant agreements, amendment requests, reimbursement claims, or any interim and final reports on behalf of the grantee. So make sure that the person authorized by the grantee is the person who will be doing this. An executed government responsibility resolution, or GRR, is required to establish an authorized responsible government official. So if you don't already have one, you should probably set up a board meeting or a council meeting, whichever process you have, and put that on the agenda to create one. The DNR recommends using a job title rather than a person's name in the authorizing resolution, so you don't need to execute a new GRR if or when there's any staff turnover. So this slide shows the GRR template to be used by grantees in establishing their ARGO. The GRR must include the language in the blue box. So pay special attention to the required bullets. Some applicants prefer using their own format for the GRR, and that's okay as long as the required bullets are included. The format really doesn't matter as long as the content is there. So I've listed a few questions to think about before beginning the grant application process. The answers to these questions will help you and your Nonpoint source coordinator figure out if you're applying for the appropriate grant and if your project is eligible. So here are some questions. Are you trying to address a stormwater runoff problem? Which BMPs do you have planned? Are you a local unit of government? Is a project in a TMDL area? How do you plan to meet TMDL goals in this project? Is this an urban area? Is this an existing urban area or new development? Are you a permitted MS4? And what's the water quality need? Are you trying to meet your WPDES permit requirement? And do you have jurisdiction over the project area, or do you have an intergovernmental agreement? So lastly, one of the grant application filters and requirements is to contact your regional non-point source coordinator to discuss your project. So this is a reminder to have that discussion early. Don't wait until the week before the deadline. A month or two is preferred. And not leaving a voicemail or sending an email is not the same as a discussion. So when you call, make sure to cover at a minimum the following topics: project eligibility, which includes applicant eligibility, extent of eligible urban project area, eligibility of proposed planning activities, the purpose or need for each scope item, the project deliverables, and the water quality need. Oops. So if you're not sure who your DNR non-point source coordinator is, here's a map with all the contacts. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute here. That's really the last thing I had, so we can take questions, but I wanted to make sure everyone knows that the applications are due on April 15th. So I put mailed, but really you can email them or send me a link on an FTP site, depending on the size of the files. So I'm going to leave this up here so you can make sure you have the contact information you need, and I will take any questions.
Thanks, Joanna. We do have a couple of questions that are specific to projects. So for those folks who have asked those questions, we'll be following up specifically on your project and the questions that you have. So we have taken those down, but if we have any other questions that are more general to the application process, we'd be happy to answer those in the remaining time. So feel free to put those into the chat box.
Whitney, I got a question from Charles Nahn. What's the total amount of money set aside for 2021 urban NPS projects?
I don't think we know exactly because it's a budget year. Corinne, do you have a better sense of?
No, I mean, that really is a truthful statement. We are waiting to see what the state budget brings. We use an appropriation of segregated funds, state segregated funds, to fund the planning projects, and we're going to remain hopeful that that appropriation is funded. Up to this point, in the current biennial budget, I believe we're allocated $1 million. That appropriation for urban non-point grants is also shared with our municipal flood control grant program. And the municipal flood control grant program does sometimes use a portion of that segregated funding, but the vast majority of it goes to the urban non-point planning projects. So essentially, we've been allocating about $1 million. And at this point, we're going to remain hopeful that we get that same amount. Obviously, we would like even more. I will say that the governor's budget was released yesterday, and our base amount, recurring amount in that appropriation is $500,000 per year. So it would be $1 million for the biennium. And it also is allocating another $1 million per year, but specifically for municipal flood control related activities. Obviously, flooding has become a very important area with climate change. So at this point, we're going to just hope that we continue to get the $500,000 per year or $1 million for the biennium. And, again, we would, because we're going every other year with the planning grants, essentially we'd have that $1 million. So it's not over until the budget is approved and signed by the governor ultimately, and we've got a ways to go in that process. So fingers crossed.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? You can direct those questions to Kareen at the Q&A chat box?
Oh, I'm bringing one over. Hang on one second.
All right. Okay. Is a plan that will identify potential green infrastructure projects eligible?
I'm going to just go to our eligible activities slide here. And then hopefully Amy or Susie can help with that.
I would say yes, in that most green infrastructure projects are pollution control, and green roofs maybe not, but you know, rain gardens, biofilters, things that provide pollution control. I think identifying locations for them would fit under the water quality planning piece.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Well, while we're waiting to see if there's any last minute questions, I am going to just launch a quick poll here. This is helpful for our UW funding, asking a few questions about the folks that are attending today. So if you wouldn't mind just completing this poll, I will open it up here. All right, hopefully you are all seeing this poll. We'll leave it open for a minute or so and wait to see if there's any other questions for the DNR staff here.
I'll read this one out loud, Joanna. When do you announce the grant recipients?
So it may depend on the budget. If we have the budget approved, and we then would, by August, so the Land and Water Conservation Board meeting the first Tuesday in August, we would then share the ranked list and scores along with a draft funding line. The October meeting is when that would become final. But if we don't have a budget by August, everything may be pushed back. So I can't tell you for sure.
I think the one thing we can say is that the earliest you would find out in final would be in October.
Right.
You'll have a good sense come August, though, with the essentially the preliminary rank lists that go before the Land and Water Conservation Board.
Right. And we would not, the funding lines that we would share will be based on the amount of money we know of at that moment. It's possible we would get more money with any grant cancellations or underspending. So most likely the funding line, if anything, would move down the list. But yes, so anything close to the funding line is would be a little bit more up in the air versus kind of top of the list. You will more likely know whether or not you'll be funded or not.
All right, very good. Well, I think we can hang on for a couple more minutes if people have any other last questions, but I do want to just thank everyone for attending today. Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation, and Kareen and Amy and Susie for joining to help answer questions. Thank you, Joe, for running tech today. And yeah, good luck with writing your application and take care.
Yes, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to talking with some of you in the next couple of months.
Wonderful.